The blizzard hit San Elizario, Texas, with a fury nobody had seen in 50 years, catching Gemma Kane halfway between her uncle's ranch and the winter-lined shack, where 5 cowboys were supposed to be checking on the cattle. And she knew with absolute certainty that if she did not reach shelter in the next 10 minutes, she would freeze to death in the saddle. Her mare stumbled through snowdrifts that rose higher with each passing moment, the wind howling across the desert landscape like some angry spirit determined to erase every living thing from the earth. Gemma had lived her 22 years in West Texas and had never experienced cold like this, never imagined that the place where summer heat could kill a man just as easily could turn into a frozen wasteland. December of 1881 was proving to be memorable in all the worst ways. Through the white curtain of snow, she finally spotted the dark outline of the lined shack, smoke rising from its chimney. Relief flooded through her frozen limbs as she urged her mare forward, nearly falling from the saddle when they reached the small structure. Her fingers were so numb she could barely grip the reins to tie the horse under the lean-to attached to the shack's side, where 4 other horses already stood huddled together for warmth. The door flew open before she could knock, and strong hands pulled her inside. Gemma stumbled into warmth and light, her vision blurring as the sudden heat hit her frozen face. Someone was removing her ice-crusted coat, leading her to the fireplace, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She heard voices, deep and concerned, but could not make out individual words through the chattering of her own teeth. "Get her boots off, she might have frostbite," one voice said, clearer now. "I will make coffee hot as hell," another added. Gemma's vision finally cleared enough to take in her surroundings. The lined shack was small, maybe 20 feet square, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. Bunks lined 2 other walls, and a rough table with chairs sat in the middle. 5 men crowded the space, all watching her with varying expressions of concern and surprise. "Miss Kane," said Jack Rivers, her uncle's foreman, crouching in front of her. He was a weathered man in his late 40s with gray threading through his brown hair. "What in God's name are you doing out in this?" "Supplies," Gemma managed through still chattering teeth. "Uncle Henry sent me with medical supplies. He said Tom got kicked by a horse yesterday." "That was yesterday, and it was just a bruise," Jack said, shaking his head. "Your uncle should have known better than to send you out with this storm coming." "He did not think it would be this bad," Gemma defended, though privately she wondered why her uncle had been so insistent she leave immediately that morning. "The sky was clear when I left." "Weather out here can turn on a dime," said another cowboy, bringing her a tin cup of coffee so hot steam rose from it in thick clouds. "I am Marcus Webb, madam. We have not met proper before." Gemma recognized him vaguely from the main ranch. He was younger than Jack, maybe 30, with dark hair and a friendly smile. She took the coffee gratefully, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. The other 3 men introduced themselves. Tom Harrison, the one who had supposedly been kicked, was a stocky man in his mid-30s with red hair and a boisterous laugh. Pete Donovan was quiet and lean, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. And then there was Lawrence Yates. He stood slightly apart from the others, leaning against the wall near the window where he had been watching the storm. He was tall and lean, probably around 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of steel in winter. While the others had crowded around her with concern and questions, he had simply watched, his expression unreadable. "The storm will last at least 2 days, maybe 3, Lawrence said, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the small space. "We are stuck here until it passes. 3 days." Gemma repeated, her heart sinking. But I cannot stay here with 5 men for 3 days. It would be completely improper. More improper than freezing to death, Jack asked gently. Miss Kane, there is no choice. You cannot go back out in that, and neither can we. We will make do and keep everything respectable. Your uncle will understand, Marcus added. He knows the realities of ranch life and weather. Gemma wanted to argue, but she knew they were right. Through the window, she could see nothing but white, the snow falling so thickly it was impossible to see more than a few feet. The wind rattled the shutters and howled down the chimney. Going back out would be suicide. All right, she said finally. But I will sleep by the fireplace, and you gentlemen will keep to your bunks. Of course, madam, Jack agreed immediately. The others nodded except Lawrence, who simply continued watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. The rest of that first day passed in awkward adjustment. The men tried to give her privacy, turning their backs when she changed out of her wet clothes into the spare set she always carried in her saddlebags. They divided up the limited food supplies, rationing carefully since nobody had expected to be snowed in for days. Gemma insisted on helping with the cooking, partly because she wanted to be useful and partly because she needed something to do with her hands to avoid thinking about how small the shack felt with 6 people inside. As evening fell and the temperature dropped even further, they gathered around the fireplace. Jack told stories about old cattle drives, making everyone laugh with his tales of mishaps and adventures. Tom proved to have a surprisingly good singing voice, leading them through several ballads. Pete whittled a piece of wood, his knife moving with practiced ease. Marcus shuffled a worn deck of cards, playing endless games of solitaire. Lawrence remained quiet, speaking only when directly addressed. Gemma found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly throughout the evening. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the easy camaraderie of the other men. He seemed isolated even in this crowded space, lost in his own thoughts. Lawrence came to us about 6 months ago, Jack said quietly when he noticed Gemma watching the younger man. Good with horses, good with cattle, keeps to himself, does not talk much about where he came from. Does he always brood like that? Gemma asked, keeping her voice low. Jack chuckled. Mostly, but he is reliable, and that matters more than conversation out here. That night, wrapped in blankets by the fireplace while the 5 men took turns keeping watch and feeding the fire, Gemma lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about her life, about how she had ended up at her uncle's ranch at all. Her parents had died of fever 2 years ago, leaving her orphaned and alone in St. Louis. Uncle Henry, her father's brother, had offered her a home on his Texas ranch, and she had accepted gratefully. She had learned to love the harsh beauty of West Texas, so different from the city where she had grown up. She had learned to ride like she was born in the saddle, to shoot straight, to read the sky for weather signs. But she had not learned how to fit in with the rigid expectations of what a young woman should be. She wanted more than marriage to some local rancher's son, more than a life of cooking and cleaning and bearing children. She wanted to feel alive, to matter, to do something meaningful. But those were dangerous thoughts for a woman in 1881, thoughts she kept locked away most of the time. The second day dawned with no break in the storm. If anything, the snow fell even more heavily, the wind even more fierce. The men kept themselves busy with small tasks, checking on the horses, reinforcing the door against the wind, maintaining their equipment. Gemma helped where she could, but there was only so much to do in such a small space. By mid-afternoon, tensions were beginning to show. Tom and Pete got into an argument over something trivial, their voices rising until Jack intervened. Marcus paced like a caged animal, clearly struggling with the confinement. Even Jack seemed on edge, snapping at Tom over a joke that would normally have made him laugh. Only Lawrence seemed unaffected. He sat on his bunk, reading a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, completely absorbed. Gemma found herself fascinated by this. Most cowboys she knew were barely literate, yet here was this quiet man reading poetry as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "May I ask what you are reading?" she asked, moving to sit on the bunk across from him. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. It was perhaps the first real expression she had seen from him. "Sonnets," he said, holding up the book. "I know it is not typical cowboy reading material." "I did not say that," Gemma replied. "I think it is wonderful. I love Shakespeare." Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down slightly. "You do? Very much. My mother used to read to me when I was young. We had a complete collection of his works." She felt the familiar pang of grief at the memory. "I had to leave most of it behind when I came to Texas. There was not room in my trunk for everything." "What is your favorite?" Lawrence asked, leaning forward slightly. "Twelfth Night, I think. Or maybe Much Ado About Nothing. I love the comedies, the way he writes about love and mistaken identity and people finding each other against all odds." She smiled. "What about you?" "The tragedies," Lawrence said. "Hamlet especially. The complexity of it, the questions about duty and desire and what we owe to others versus what we owe ourselves." They talked for over an hour, discussing Shakespeare, then moving on to other books they had read, ideas they had considered. Gemma felt something awakening inside her, a hunger she had been suppressing since coming to Texas. Here was someone who understood the life of the mind, who found meaning in words and ideas beyond the practical necessities of survival. She became aware, gradually, that the other men had grown quiet, watching them with interest. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and stood abruptly. "I should help with dinner," she said. "Of course," Lawrence replied, his face closing off again, the wall going back up. But something had changed. Gemma felt it, and she suspected he did too. That night, unable to sleep again, Gemma rose to add wood to the fire. She found Lawrence already there, feeding logs into the flames. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "I have the watch." "I cannot sleep," Gemma admitted. "Too much thinking," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. They sat together in the firelight, the others sleeping soundly in their bunks. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault. "May I ask you something?" Gemma said after a long silence. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why are you so separate from the others? They are good men, friendly, but you keep yourself apart." Lawrence was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he sighed. "It is easier," he said finally. "Caring about people, letting them care about you, it only leads to pain. Better to keep your distance." "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It is," he agreed, "but it is safer." "Safer than what?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw pain in those gray eyes, old and deep. "Safer than losing people you love. Safer than having them taken from you." Gemma understood. She had lost her parents, knew that particular grief. "Who did you lose?" "My family," Lawrence said quietly. "My parents and my younger sister. There was a fire 3 years ago. I was away working on a ranch in Colorado. By the time I got word and made it back to Kansas, they were already buried." "I am so sorry," Gemma whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. He did not pull away. "Since then I have kept moving, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments, never letting anyone get close." "That is no way to live," Gemma said. "They would not want that for you. You do not know what they would want." "No," Gemma agreed. "But I know what my parents would want for me. They would want me to live fully, to love, to let myself be happy even though they are gone. I think your family would want the same for you." Lawrence turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "You are very wise for 22. How did you know my age? Jack mentioned it. You are wondering if I am too old for you. It was not a question. Gemma felt her breath catch. I was not wondering that specifically. I am 26, Lawrence said. Not too old, I hope. No, Gemma breathed. Not too old. They sat like that, hands clasped, until the fire burned low and Lawrence had to add more wood. By unspoken agreement, they did not speak more that night, but something had been said nonetheless. Something important. The third day brought a subtle shift in the storm. The wind was less fierce, the snow falling less heavily. By afternoon, patches of blue were visible through the clouds. Jack declared that by morning they should be able to make their way back to the main ranch. Gemma should have been relieved. Instead, she felt something like panic. Once they returned to the ranch, to normal life and expectations, whatever had begun to grow between her and Lawrence would wither. She would go back to being the boss's niece, privileged and separate. He would go back to being just another cowboy, keeping his distance from everyone. She found him outside that afternoon, checking on the horses. The storm had finally stopped, leaving the world transformed under several feet of snow. The desert landscape looked alien, beautiful and dangerous. We will leave tomorrow, Gemma said, standing beside him in the lean-to. Yes, Lawrence agreed. And then what? He did not pretend to misunderstand. Then nothing. You go back to your life, I go back to mine. It does not have to be that way. Yes, it does. His voice was firm but not unkind. You are Henry Kane's niece. I am a cowboy who drifts from place to place. There is no future there. There could be if you wanted there to be. Lawrence turned to face her fully. What I want does not matter. You deserve someone established, someone who can give you a real home, a real future. What if I want to choose for myself what I deserve? Gemma challenged. What if I want someone who reads Shakespeare and understands what it is like to lose everything and who sees me, really sees me, not just what he expects me to be? Gemma, Lawrence said, and her name on his lips was almost a prayer. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. In 3 days, you have talked to me more honestly than most people have in my entire life. You have treated me like I have a mind, like my thoughts matter. Do you know how rare that is? That does not mean we can build a life together. Why not? Because I have nothing to offer you. You have yourself, Gemma said. That is enough. Lawrence shook his head, but she saw the longing in his eyes, the want. Your uncle would never approve. My uncle wants me to be happy. Your uncle wants you to marry well to a man with property and prospects. My uncle knows I am too stubborn to be told who to love, Gemma countered. Before Lawrence could respond, Marcus called from the shack that dinner was ready. The moment broke, and they went inside to join the others. But Gemma caught Lawrence's eyes across the fire multiple times that evening, and each time the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. That night, their last night in the shack, Lawrence did not take a watch. Jack insisted he sleep, said he and Tom would handle it. Gemma lay by the fire, listening to the breathing of 5 men, wondering if she had imagined the connection she felt with Lawrence if she was being a fool. She must have dozed off because she woke to find Lawrence sitting beside her in the pre-dawn darkness. He held a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cold air. I need to tell you something, he said quietly, his voice pitched not to wake the others. Before we go back and everything gets complicated. Gemma sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. What is it? Lawrence was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When I first saw you stumble through that door 3 days ago, half frozen and completely stubborn about the impropriety of being here, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And then you opened your mouth and started talking, and I realized beautiful was not nearly enough of a word. Gemma's heart was pounding. Lawrence, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I have spent 3 years keeping everyone at arm's length, convincing myself it was better not to care, not to risk getting hurt again. And then 3 days with you undid all of that. You challenged me, talked with me, saw past the walls I put up, and I realized something. What? He set down his coffee and took both her hands in his. You were made for me alone, not for some wealthy rancher's son who will never appreciate your mind or your spirit, not for a life of quiet desperation, pretending to be less than you are to make someone else comfortable. You were made for me, and I think maybe I was made for you, and I am tired of pretending that does not matter. Tears sprang to Gemma's eyes. Do you mean that? Every word. I know I have nothing to offer but myself. I know your uncle will probably throw me off his ranch when he finds out. But if you are willing to take a chance on a cowboy with no prospects and a battered copy of Shakespeare, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. Yes, Gemma breathed. Yes, absolutely yes. Lawrence smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look years younger. You are sure, because once we do this, once we declare ourselves, there is no going back. I am absolutely sure, Gemma said firmly. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. He leaned forward and kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise sealed in the darkness while 4 other cowboys slept unaware. When they broke apart, Gemma was smiling so wide her face hurt. We should probably tell the others, Lawrence said, glancing toward the bunks where soft snoring indicated everyone was still asleep. Soon, Gemma agreed. But let us have this moment, just us, for a little while longer. They sat together as dawn broke, watching through the window as the sun rose over the snow-covered landscape. Everything was transformed, made new. It felt appropriate somehow, like the world was acknowledging the change that had occurred in this small line shack over 3 storm-bound days. When the others woke and began preparing to leave, Jack immediately noticed something different. He looked from Gemma to Lawrence and back again, his eyebrows rising. Something you two want to share, he asked. We are courting, Gemma said simply, lifting her chin. Officially. Tom let out a whoop of laughter. I knew it. Marcus, you owe me $5. You bet on us, Gemma asked, incredulous. The tension between you two has been thick enough to cut with a knife since yesterday, Marcus said, grinning as he handed over his money. We all saw it. Does this mean you are planning to stick around, Lawrence? Pete asked, speaking up for the first time in hours. No more drifting, Lawrence looked at Gemma, and she saw the decision being made in his eyes. Yes, he said. I am staying. Good, Jack said firmly. Henry will have questions, and he will want to make sure your intentions are honorable, but he is a fair man. If you prove yourself worthy of his niece, he will give his blessing. I plan to prove myself every day for the rest of my life, Lawrence said, not looking away from Gemma. The journey back to the main ranch was slow and careful, the horses picking their way through snow drifts that in some places were higher than their knees. But the sky was clear and bright, the air crisp and clean. Gemma rode beside Lawrence, their legs occasionally brushing as the horses walked close together. Every touch sent warmth through her, better than any fire. When they finally reached the main ranch, late in the afternoon, Uncle Henry came rushing out of the house, relief clear on his weathered face. Thank God, he said, pulling Gemma into a rough embrace as soon as she dismounted. I was worried sick. The storm was so much worse than expected. I am fine, Uncle, Gemma assured him. The Cowboys took good care of me. I am grateful to all of you, Henry said, addressing the men. Get the horses settled and come to the house for hot food. You all must be exhausted. Actually, Uncle, could I speak with you privately first? Gemma asked. There is something important I need to tell you. Henry's eyes sharpened, taking in the way she stood close to Lawrence, the way their hands almost but not quite touched. I see, he said slowly. All right. Lawrence, you come too. The rest of you go on and get warm. In Uncle Henry's study, with its leather chairs and walls lined with books, Gemma stood beside Lawrence and told her uncle everything. Well, almost everything. She left out the intensity of their late-night conversations, the way her heart raced when Lawrence looked at her, the kiss in the darkness. But she told him they had formed an attachment, that they wanted to court properly, that Lawrence intended to stay and prove himself. Henry listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When Gemma finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Lawrence, he said finally, you have worked for me for 6 months. Jack speaks highly of you, says you are reliable and skilled, but I do not know much about your background, your family. I am from Kansas originally, Lawrence said, his voice steady despite the nerves Gemma could sense in him. My family are all deceased. I have been working ranches since I was 16, learning the trade. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to prove I am not destitute, and I give you my word that I will treat Gemma with the respect and care she deserves. That is all well and good, Henry said. But my niece could have her pick of ranchers' sons, men with property and established futures. Why should I approve her attaching herself to a cowboy who, by your own admission, has been drifting for years? Because I love her, Lawrence said simply. And because I see her for who she really is, not who society says she should be. I know about her mind, her spirit, her hunger for more than the conventional life expected of her. And I want to give her a life where she can be fully herself. Henry looked at Gemma. And you? You have known this man for 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough, Gemma said. Sometimes you meet someone and you just know. He is right, uncle, he sees me. And that is rarer and more valuable than all the property in Texas. Her uncle sighed, but Gemma saw the corners of his mouth twitch. You are as stubborn as your father was. He fell for your mother after knowing her for a week, married her a month later, and they had 25 happy years together. He looked at Lawrence. I will give you 6 months. You will work your regular duties and you may court Gemma properly. At the end of 6 months, if you both still feel the same, we will talk about marriage. But there will be no impropriety in the meantime. Is that clear? Absolutely clear, sir, Lawrence said. Thank you for giving me this chance. Do not make me regret it, Henry warned. But his eyes were kind when he looked at his niece. Your parents would want you to be happy, Gemma. That is all I want too. The next 6 months passed in a blur of work and courtship and growing love. Lawrence threw himself into his duties, working harder than ever, taking on extra responsibilities. He was determined to show Henry that he could provide for Gemma, that he was worthy of her. They courted in the ranch's parlor, always with a proper chaperone nearby. They took rides together in the early evenings, sometimes alone but always back before dark. They talked about everything under the sun, discovering they had more in common than either had expected. Lawrence shared his dreams of one day having his own small ranch, nothing grand, but enough to support a family. Gemma shared her desire to be a true partner in whatever life they built, not just a wife but an equal contributor. The other ranch hands quickly accepted their relationship. Jack became something of a protective older brother to both of them, making sure nobody made inappropriate comments. Tom and Marcus teased Lawrence mercilessly, but good-naturedly. Pete, in his quiet way, gave Lawrence advice about women and marriage based on his own 30 years of wedded life to his sweetheart back east, who had passed away 10 years prior. As winter turned to spring and spring to early summer, everyone could see that what Lawrence and Gemma had was real and lasting. They moved around each other with the ease of people who understood each other deeply. They finished each other's sentences, shared private jokes, communicated with glances across crowded rooms. Henry watched it all with approval. Lawrence had proven himself a dozen times over in those 6 months. He had worked through injury when a horse kicked him in the ribs. He had spent 3 nights in a row helping with a difficult calving season, never complaining about the lack of sleep. He had saved 2 other cowboys from a potentially deadly stampede by his quick thinking and action. And through it all, he had treated Gemma with unfailing respect and devotion. On a warm evening in late June, Henry called them both to his study. "6 months are up," he said without preamble. "Have your feelings changed?" "No, sir," Lawrence said immediately. "If anything, they have deepened. I love Gemma more now than I did that morning in the line shack, and I did not think that was possible." "I feel the same," Gemma added. "I want to marry him, Uncle. I want to build a life with him." Henry nodded as if he had expected nothing less. "Then you have my blessing." "Lawrence, I have a proposition for you." "Sir." "There is a section of land on the eastern edge of my property, about 500 acres. Good grazing, a creek that never runs dry, and a spot that would be perfect for a house. I am prepared to deed it to you as a wedding present, along with 50 head of cattle to get you started. You will run your own operation but can make use of my ranch's resources as needed. What do you say?" Lawrence looked stunned. "Sir, that is too generous." "I cannot accept." "You can and you will," Henry interrupted. "You have proven yourself, son. More than that, you have made my niece happier than I have seen her since her parents died. You are family now, and family takes care of each other." "Thank you," Lawrence said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will take good care of her," Henry replied. "That is all the thanks I need." They married a month later on a bright July day in 1882. The wedding was held at the ranch, with all the cowboys and neighboring ranchers invited. Gemma wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. Lawrence wore a new suit that Henry had insisted on buying him. Jack stood up as Lawrence's best man, and Sarah Peterson, the wife of a neighboring rancher and Gemma's closest friend, stood up for the bride. The ceremony was simple but moving. When Lawrence said his vows, his voice steady and clear, promising to love and cherish Gemma for all his days, there was not a dry eye among the witnesses. And when Gemma promised the same, her hand firm in his, everyone could see the truth of it shining in her face. At the reception, held in the ranch's big barn decorated with wildflowers, Tom and Marcus provided music on fiddle and guitar. Jack gave a toast that was both funny and touching, talking about how Lawrence had been a ghost of a man when he first arrived, and how Gemma had brought him back to life. There was dancing and laughter and joy, the kind that comes from a community celebrating a union they all support. As the sun set and the party continued, Lawrence and Gemma slipped away, riding toward their new home. The house was not finished yet, but a cabin stood on the property, small but snug, perfect for newlyweds. Inside, by lamplight, Lawrence took Gemma's face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked. "So happy I can barely breathe," Gemma replied. "Are you?" "I never thought I could be this happy again," Lawrence admitted. "After I lost my family, I thought that part of my life was over, but you showed me that closing yourself off is not living. You taught me to risk again, to hope again." "We saved each other," Gemma said. "That storm brought us together, but we chose each other every day since." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with the same care they had taken learning each other's minds and hearts. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about their dreams for the future, the life they would build together. True to Henry's word, the 500 acres became theirs to shape. Over the next year, they built their house, modest but comfortable, with a wide porch and windows that let in light. They worked the land together, Gemma proving as capable with cattle as any cowboy. Lawrence began breeding horses, using his skill and patience to develop a reputation for quality stock. Their first winter, as a married couple, brought a brief snowstorm. Nothing like the blizzard that had thrown them together, but enough to remind them. They spent 3 days snowed in again, but this time in their own home, making love and talking and simply being together. Lawrence read Shakespeare to Gemma by the fire, and she laughed and cried at all the right places. "You ever think about that line shack?" Gemma asked one night. "About how different our lives would be if that storm had not hit." "All the time," Lawrence admitted. "I think about how I almost missed you, because I was too afraid to let anyone in. That storm was the best thing that ever happened to me." "The second best," Gemma corrected. "The best thing was having the courage to tell me I was made for you alone." "You were, though," Lawrence said seriously. "You were made for me, and I was made for you. I truly believe that." In the spring of 1883, Gemma discovered she was pregnant. Lawrence was overcome with joy and terror in equal measure. The memory of losing his family made him protective to the point of hovering, until Gemma had to gently but firmly tell him she was not made of glass. Their first child, a son, was born in December of that year, during another cold snap, though nothing like the blizzard. They named him Thomas Henry Yates, after his grandfather and great-uncle. Lawrence held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "I was so afraid," he whispered to Gemma. "Afraid I would lose you both." "We are here," Gemma assured him. "We are all here, and we are safe." Little Thomas was followed by a daughter 2 years later, Grace Elizabeth, and then another son, Michael James, 2 years after that. The house they had built expanded with additions to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered, Lawrence's horse breeding becoming increasingly successful, Gemma's management of their cattle operation proving her equal to any rancher in the territory. Uncle Henry was a constant presence in their lives, doting on his great-nieces and nephews, offering advice and help whenever needed. Jack Rivers became like an uncle to the children as well, teaching them to ride almost before they could walk. Tom and Marcus eventually married and had families of their own, their ranches neighboring Lawrence and Gemma's land. Pete retired after a few years, moving to El Paso to live with a cousin, but he visited regularly and always brought peppermints for the children. As the years passed, Lawrence and Gemma became pillars of the San Elizario community. They were known for their fairness, their hard work, and the deep love that was obvious to everyone who saw them together. They never lost the habit of long conversations, of reading together by the fire, of riding out to watch the sunset and talk about their days. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lawrence gave Gemma a leather-bound journal. Inside the front cover he had written, "For recording our adventures past, present, and future." "We have had quite an adventure, have not we?" Gemma said, running her fingers over the inscription. "The best adventure," Lawrence agreed, "and it is not over yet." They sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, already showing his father's way with horses. Grace was 10, with her mother's sharp mind and stubborn streak. Michael was 8, quiet and thoughtful, always with a book in his hands. "Do you remember what you said to me that morning in the line shack?" Gemma asked. "About how I was made for you alone." "I remember every word I have ever said to you," Lawrence replied. "But yes, especially that. I want you to know that you were right. I was made for you and you were made for me, and every day of the last 10 years has only proven it more." Lawrence pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Gemma Yates, more than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "That is very poetic," Gemma teased. "Have you been reading Shakespeare without me?" "Never," Lawrence promised. We always read Shakespeare together. And they did, that night and countless nights after. They grew old together, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They expanded their ranch, took on more hands, became successful beyond what either had dreamed that snowy morning when they first acknowledged their feelings. But success was not what mattered most. What mattered was the partnership they had built, the deep and abiding love that sustained them through hardships and celebrations alike. What mattered was the family they had created, the life they had shaped with their own hands. When Lawrence was 70 and Gemma was 66, they sat on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a celebration of their 44th wedding anniversary. The house was full of noise and laughter, 3 generations of Yates filling every room. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Gemma asked, her hand in Lawrence's. Both their hands were gnarled with age now, but they fit together as perfectly as they had 44 years before. "No," Lawrence admitted. "When I was drifting from place to place, convinced I would never let anyone close again, I could not have imagined this. I could not have imagined you." "But then there was a blizzard," Gemma said, smiling. "But then there was a blizzard," Lawrence agreed. "And 5 cowboys in a lined shack, and a woman stubborn enough to ride out in a storm to deliver medical supplies nobody actually needed." "You think Uncle Henry sent me on purpose?" Gemma asked, not for the first time. "Do you think he knew the storm was coming and wanted to throw us together?" "I have wondered that myself," Lawrence said. He never admitted it, but he always had a knowing look in his eyes when we talked about that day. Henry Kane had passed away 5 years earlier at the age of 92, surrounded by the family he had helped create. His last words to Lawrence had been, "I knew you were the one for her the moment I saw you reading that book in the bunkhouse. Most cowboys could barely write their own names, but there you were with Shakespeare. I knew my Gemma needed someone who could match her mind." "He was a good man," Gemma said softly. "I miss him." "He was," Lawrence agreed, "but his legacy lives on in all of this." He gestured to the house, the land, the family gathered inside. "None of this would exist without him giving us a chance." Their grandson, the first Thomas's eldest son, came out onto the porch. He was 16, tall and serious like his grandfather had been at that age. "Grandpa, Grandma, we are ready to cut the cake," he said. Inside, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Lawrence and Gemma cut into the elaborate cake that their daughter Grace had spent days preparing. There were toasts and tears and laughter, stories told and retold about the legendary blizzard that had brought them together. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed in the various rooms throughout the house, Lawrence and Gemma lay in their bed, the same bed they had shared for 44 years. "I am glad you rode out in that storm," Lawrence whispered in the darkness. "I am glad you told me I was made for you alone," Gemma whispered back. "You were, though. You are. And you were made for me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, exactly as they had done thousands of nights before. And when the morning came, they woke to another day of the life they had built together. A life neither had expected but both had fought for. A life filled with love and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had found in each other exactly what they needed. The story of the blizzard became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The lined shack where it all began was preserved, eventually turned into a small museum of sorts on the ranch, filled with memorabilia from those early days. The battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that Lawrence had been reading that day held a place of honor in the main house, passed down through the generations as a symbol of the love that had founded their family. And on cold winter nights, when storms rolled across the desert and snow occasionally fell on West Texas. The descendants of Lawrence and Gemma Yates would gather around fires and remember the story of how their family began. They would remember that sometimes the harshest conditions create the most beautiful outcomes. They would remember that love can be found in the most unexpected places. And they would remember that sometimes, just sometimes, two people are made for each other alone, and no storm can keep them apart. Lawrence Yates lived to be 78, passing peacefully in his sleep with Gemma beside him. True to form, even in death he was reading, a book of poetry open on his chest. Gemma lived another 6 years, surrounded always by the family they had created, never lonely because Lawrence was in every corner of the house they had built, every acre of land they had worked, every sunset they had watched together. When she passed at 84, her children found a letter she had written to be opened after her death. In it, she wrote about the blizzard, about meeting Lawrence, about the life they had shared. She ended with these words, "If I could go back and change anything, I would not." Not the hardships, not the struggles, not even the grief of losing those we loved. Because all of it, every moment, led me to him and led us to all of you. That blizzard brought me 5 cowboys, but only one saw my heart. Only one told me I was made for him alone, and he was right. I was, and I am, and I will be throughout whatever eternity brings. Tell my grandchildren and their children that love is worth the risk. Tell them that sometimes 3 days is enough to know. Tell them that the right person will see you, truly see you, and that recognition is worth more than all the security and propriety in the world. And tell them that their grandfather and I loved each other more with each passing day, from that snowy morning in 1881 until the day I join him again. We had 44 years of marriage and 50 years of love, counting those 6 months of courting. And it was not nearly enough, but it was everything. The letter was framed and hung in the main house, beside Lawrence's Shakespeare sonnets and a painting of the old line shack in a snowstorm. And the Yates family continued to grow and prosper on the land that Gemma Kane had given to a drifting cowboy and his stubborn niece. The land where a love story had taken root during a blizzard and flourished for 50 years, creating a legacy that would last for generations. Because some love stories are not just about two people finding each other. Some love stories are about two people creating something larger than themselves, building a future from nothing but devotion and hard work, and the unshakable belief that they were, indeed, made for each other alone. Lawrence and Gemma's story was one of those, and it lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love to transform not just 2 lives but countless lives to come. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy while holding true to the values that Lawrence and Gemma established. And every time it snows in San Elizario, Texas, which is rare but does happen, the current residents of the Yates Ranch remember. They remember that sometimes the biggest storms bring the greatest blessings. They remember that love can be found in the most unlikely circumstances. And they remember that, when you find the person who truly sees you, who recognizes you as you are and loves you for it, you hold on and never let go. That is the legacy of a 3-day blizzard in December 1881, when a woman rode through a storm and found 5 cowboys in a lined shack. And one of them changed her life forever by seeing what no one else had seen, by saying what needed to be said, by recognizing what they both needed even when they had only just met. You were made for me alone, 5 words that changed everything. 5 words that built a dynasty. 5 words that proved love does not always need time, it just needs truth. And Lawrence and Gemma had truth in abundance, from that first real conversation about Shakespeare to their last evening on the porch, watching the sunset together one more time. Their story was not always easy. There were years of drought that threatened the ranch, years when cattle prices fell and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials that come with a life lived close to the land. They lost Uncle Henry, they lost friends. They watched as the Wild West they had known slowly transformed into something more settled and civilized. But through it all, they had each other. And that made every hardship bearable, every triumph sweeter. They faced life as partners, as equals, as two people who had recognized in each other something rare and precious and worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the real story. Not just about a blizzard or 5 cowboys or even a dramatic declaration of love, though all of those played their part. The real story was about two people who chose each other every single day for 50 years, who worked together and laughed together and raised a family together, who read Shakespeare by firelight and watched sunsets from their porch and never took for granted the gift they had been given. That gift was each other. And it was truly more than enough. It was everything.